Hello, thank you so much for joining me. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. I'm going to be talking today about Saturn in the sign of Aquarius in 2020. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be really honoured if you did so now. Please also like or share your feelings. Give me some feedback. I do tend to interact with all comments. I really appreciate when people do say how they find things. I'd also like to just briefly tell you about my subscribers. I've got 17,000 subscribers and I'd love you to become one of them. I share some very in-depth written articles 2 or 3 times a week, and also I feel a really excellent monthly magazine. So I'd love you to become part of that, and you can choose to get your daily horoscope free within that. Now at the end of this video I'm going to share something really quite personal about my situation, which is going to enable you to understand how Saturn's going to impact on me throughout this year. So I hope you stay with me till then. So this year sees Saturn move into Aquarius twice. Firstly on the 22nd of March at 3:59 Greenwich Mean Time, and then again on the 17th of December, I think it's at 5:04 a.m. again based on Greenwich Mean Time. The reason it's going to be moving into Aquarius twice is because on the 11th of May Saturn goes into a retrograde, and by the 2nd of July it moves into the sign of Capricorn again. Now it's actually going to invert in its retrograde pretty well to meet up with a conjunction by a couple of degrees with Pluto. And of course we've had that quite powerfully over the last year, broadly within about 3 degrees, and it all peaked in January on the 12th, and then from the 18th of February Saturn started to inch forwards, but that retrograde is going to see it come back into connection with Pluto in the autumn in the northern hemisphere and the spring in the southern hemisphere. So we're still going to get some of that very potent energy from Capricorn during this year, and from the relationship of Saturn in its transit with Pluto. But what I want to do in this analysis is give you 2 birth chart wheels based on when Saturn moves into Aquarius on each occasion. Because we can talk about Saturn moving into Aquarius in broad terms, but what's the relationship with the other planets when that moment occurs? Because that's a natal horoscope. When you're born, or when I'm born, that map of our identity is so intrinsically important to who we are. So why shouldn't we think of planets in the same way? So when they move, how are they speaking to the other planets around them? So let's look at what's going on the 22nd of March. So there's Saturn in Aquarius at 0 degrees 0 minutes. And the most wonderful thing I see straight away is it's forging an enabling sextile with the Sun. Saturn is about structure, positively. The Sun is about initiation, about our core energy. And in the sign of Aries, it's very much about starting a new cycle. So incredible that the 2 events coincide. Saturn into Aquarius, the Sun only 1 degree into the start of the new astrological tropical western horoscope year. So that's great. So we've got a new start, and that new start in this chart sees the Sun in the 2nd house, which is about being realistic about resources, realistic about how we feel about ourselves, our own identities. And Saturn in the 12th house is about kind of making use of our past experiences, because what I feel that this first natal chart for the first transit represents is a transition, and therefore we've got to be very conscious of where Saturn's coming from as well as where it's travelling. Now the other crucial thing about Saturn in Aquarius this year is it only gets up to 1 degree before its own retrograde takes it back into Capricorn. So it's not penetrating very deep into Aquarius at all. So what influence does it have in the first naught and 1 degree of Aquarius. Well, in Indian astrology, in the duads or Dward system, that means that this is a double Aquarius influence. So therefore, I think we can think very much of Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius, which rules the first 10 degrees of Aquarius, the first decan. The second decan, of course, is ruled by Mercury, and the third by Venus. And some people also say the moon. So this particular position of where Saturn is very Aquarius, and it's also very Uranian. So Uranus is about change, Saturn is about continuity. So you've got two very different conflicting energies. But also Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius. So Saturn rules Capricorn, and the energy of Capricorn is how we think about Saturn. So that's very much to do with big structures, rules and regulations, the police, government, reliability, obligations, responsibility, material achievement, status, and in a wider context it's to do with power, traditional power. It could be said to represent, in more classical astrology, the father. So we still have Mars, Jupiter and Pluto in an extraordinarily important conjunction. And Mars conjunct Pluto can be really quite explosive. I can only be truthful about it. So Pluto is about that raw power that's often hidden away, where people don't like to reveal their motives. It's secretive. Mars loves being in Capricorn, but it's about making progress in a more material way. Jupiter's in full in Capricorn, but Jupiter and Mars together creates a sense of confidence and go-getting and living in the moment, being more speculative, which Capricorn energy tries to wet down, because it's saying, look, we need to use our experience and our skills and our knowledge in a wise way. So this is fascinating on its own, but in this chart all of these are in the 12th house, which is psychology. It's to do with Piscean energy, it's gases, it's ethereal, it's not necessarily tangible in some ways, so I feel it's more hidden stuff. And I do think that this particular configuration really points very much towards the potential for some kind of challenge to the status quo resisting it. So Saturn in Aquarius wants to challenge, because with Uranus it's about change. But we also need to think about Aquarius energy, which is about networking, friendship, the long-term future, planning. It's about being collegiate, community-minded, cooperative. It's also about respecting the individual, whereas the 10th house is more about who directs the power to the masses, whereas Aquarius is more about the individuals that make up the masses. So Saturn moving here has a different relationship. And I think it's possible, particularly in the 12th house, that this transition that we're going to see is going to see some people who've been quite caught up in the more consumer way of leading life become much more conscious of the fact that it's not just about what we consume, it is about people. So our structures needs to be based on people. Now, obviously at this time we have this incredibly worrying COVID-19 coronavirus taking shape. And in this particular chart, if we take the Sun in the Aries and we see the Moon in Pisces, and the midpoint between them is at 19 degrees Pisces, conjunct Neptune, the ruler of Pisces. So that midpoint there on this event suggests to me real potential, especially the first house, the body, real potential for there to be a lot of focus on that situation. Also anything to do environmentally, to do with rivers, seas, lakes, pollution, flooding, all that kind of stuff, global warming in general. It's definitely going to be really becoming much more of an active issue with this Piscean watery energy as the midpoint, even though the Sun's in the fiery Aries and Saturn is in the airy Aquarius. I think Pisces energy is much to the fore. And how we relate to others is interesting, because the midpoint and Neptune are in a quincunx with Juno, how we relate to others, in the fair-minded Libra, but in the 8th house of psychology. And also incidentally, if you do have that wonderful date on that day, which it could go marvellously well with Venus and Neptune in a sextile, but also Venus is in a quincunx, a challenging quincunx with Juno. So if you do meet someone for the first time, just be aware that however magical it seems, and I really hope it works out brilliantly well for you, with Neptune, Piscean energy, things aren't always what they seem. So just be conscious of that. So this chart gives us a real opportunity to make the transition from the big power that Pluto has brought to Capricorn since 2008, more acutely since 2017, December, when Saturn moved into that area, and now it's emerged into Aquarius. So we need to be aware of the psychology of how we're all bound together. But what are the things that Saturn in Aquarius can do for us? How can it be positive? Well, I think it can really be very positive, both in a more societal way, but also what about our relationship to Saturn? So it's not just about how we fit into the world at large, it's our relationship with ourselves. How's that likely to change? And I think the interesting thing is that Saturn here is going to push us to be more democratic, to try to link to other people. We might resist it initially because we might feel, well, I don't like being pushed to connect with other people, which is very Aquarius, to have that rebelliousness. But think of how we can, or how you can make it come into your life in a way that helps you. And I think some kind of reconstruction, whether we all become more aware of how much power we use, how much we recycle things, how much we embrace the concept of kindness or community. They're very Aquarius values, and Saturn can call out those people who are not showing those values. It will. And other people who are showing those values are going to come more into vogue. So we all have an opportunity to make choices. It's not just what's going on in the wider world. The other thing I want to talk about with Saturn moving into Aquarius is not just the environmental issues. It's to do with artificial intelligence, it's to do with automation and the role of person-kind. Now, some governments, especially Scandinavian governments, are already talking about how they can pay people to stay at home and do more cultural things which are uplifting and have a benefit to society. Now, for some people that can sound really fantastically interesting, and for other people may find that challenging. Now, I personally love work, but not everybody likes to work all the time, so it just depends on our unique personalities. But those trends are going to become much more prevalent with the change that comes from Aquarius through the more innovative side of Aquarius energy, which of course is based on Uranus. The more traditional fixed side of Aquarius comes from Saturn, which treasures institutions, camaraderie, old relationships, friendships, group activities, and doesn't just get rid of them because they've served their time. There's a real respect for them. So this is where Aquarius energy has a duality. And whenever magazines talk loosely about Aquarius, it's very often based on the more Uranus values rather than the more Saturnian values. So basically Aquarius people can be very friendly, can be very detached, can be quite logical, can be quite airy, and can be sort of people that have lots of different friends, but also conversely can like complete and utter seclusion, silence, quiet, time alone, and value old friendships and old situations, even if they don't necessarily represent their current thinking, simply because they have respect for the past. So I think this is what society as a whole is going to be going through. We're moving into this time where we need to connect with one another a lot more, and technology is brilliant for that in some ways. And of course the downside is when technology is misused and we have people spamming, people sledging people online, being abusive. That's the downside of the community online, but it can also be incredibly connected, so we can talk to people all around the world who share our interests and our credo, which can bring us together. So actually Facebook is Aquarius, believe it or not, so that's fascinating. But so for example, say with Facebook, where their view is that anyone can put an advert on Facebook, it doesn't matter if it's the truth, because it's their reality. That's going to get challenged against Facebook big time. So Aquariusness is very much to do with truth and justice, and the whole glyph of the water carrier Obviously it's rather confusing to people getting into astrology, because you think, well, Aquarius is about air, why is it the water carrier? It's because it's linked simply to baptism, because it's higher ideals. It's trying to connect ourselves to the better part of personkind, not the lower part. So Saturnian energy is going to call out people increasingly who don't have respect for others and promote the causes and people who do, and that's the wonderful thing. But I think this chart does have the potential for new starts, but we must be very mindful of what we've created in the past. So all this push through Capricornian energies, it's not about Capricornian individuals, because with Pluto and Saturn it's much more structural, societal stuff. Individual Capricorns will have their individual birth charts, which may have the Sun in Capricorn, but will have lots of other different qualities, and they just have certain qualities that the Capricornian influence or Saturnian influence, but can have lots of other different qualities which is way beyond just Capricorn. And this is why we do need to ascend to Sirius astrology, away from sun signs, if we're really going to educate ourselves through astrology of its great benefits. So sun signs are lovely, they're fun, they're informative, but they do have a degree of limitation. So that's why this chart is saying there can be moves forward to this new reality, but we are going to be dealing with the fallout from the past. And Mars and Pluto can be quite warlike. This is where people are being very confrontational in order to get their way, but they may not necessarily do it in a particularly obvious way. Pluto hidden, Jupiter international affairs. So stuff going on in the international sphere, it just seems really obvious to me, but we need to be aware of our compassion, our sense of feelings, our sense of empathy for others, as well as firing up this new astrological year. So that's how I see this Saturn natal chart when it moves in March the 22nd. So I'm just going to extend out and go through to the 17th of December. So the 17th of December chart is really different, and it's actually really exciting. The first thing that jumped out for me straight away, so there we go, 0 degrees Saturn and 0 minutes, but look at where the moon is. It's within 1 degree of Saturn. And also Jupiter, which is moving into Aquarius on the 20th of December, is also under 1 degree away. So we have a conjunction between Jupiter and the moon, which is glorious. And it's also in the second house, which is to do with self-worth, it's to do with practicalities, it's quite Taurus. We also have the midpoint there at 12 degrees Capricorn, so again earthy. But we also have the energy of the Sun in Sagittarius, and it's angled to Mars in Aries. Now Mars is in its dignity in Aries, it rules this sign in the 5th house based on Greenwich at this time of 5:04, which I'm struggling to remember exactly. And we can see the midpoint very Capricornian, but the Sun in fact is in Sagittarius. Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, conjunct Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, conjunct the moon, and they're both conjunct Saturn. So this entry of Saturn into Aquarius is going to be much more what we would normally characterize the transit into to Aquarius as being about. It's going to be much more positive, much more hopeful. And the glorious thing is that on the 14th of December, the Sun is actually going to merge with the Moon, and we have an amazing solar eclipse, which is going to pick up with Mars in an exact trine. So already we're going to be really fizzing with a lot more vibrancy and hope and a desire to get things onto a better footing. So this collective energy of Aquarius, which can be very solving, we take the discipline of Saturn, but we repackage it with greater innovation. So we treasure the elements of the past that work, So that could be fair law and order. So if you're lucky enough to live in a country where law and order is fair, we could take that fair law and order but reapply it in a more modern way, so we're more conscious of how society is changing, to make adaptations to different laws to deal with technology, for example. But it's a progression in a very progressive way. So we take the best of the past and treasure it, but adapt it. And that's this energy that's going to be coming through Saturn in Aquarius on the 17th of December. So really exciting, and with this wonderful fiery angle between Mercury, the Sun, which are pretty well combust, and then we've got also Mars there. So all of this is going to give us a real sense of optimism as we come to the end of the year. Now, for the first 2 weeks of 2021, Saturn and Jupiter are going to be conjunct. So the solar return for 2021 has them conjunct. Saturn is about restriction, Jupiter is about growth. So between them and in the sign of Aquarius, we get balanced, thoughtful growth, which has a much greater chance of being sustained. Now, I do feel that some astrologers will say that in 2021, Jupiter and Saturn both being in Aquarius will work in concert throughout the year, but they can only work in concert really in terms of the generalized energy they bring. It's when they are actually connecting. But for this year, I think really to just bring this to a conclusion, we can see that March is going to be a more difficult transit for Saturn into Aquarius. I think the fallout from the misuse of power is going to be quite considerable, and those who have power, big state, whether it's Chinese government, Russian government, are going to be clinging on to this for dear life right into the autumn, northern hemisphere, spring, southern. But then the Aquarius energy that comes in on the back of that, Sagittarius solar eclipse on the 14th of December, followed by Saturn moving on the 17th, that wonderful connection between the Moon and Jupiter on that return in this natal horoscope, and the relationship of Mars is going to fire us all up. So when we're going into 2021, I think we're going to be becoming much more realistic about what we need to do about global change, the environment. Hopefully solutions and antidotes will be coming through for this awful virus which is affecting personkind in such a dreadful way. And you know, if we can find ways to work together, to celebrate community, to celebrate cooperation, to celebrate collegiateness, the unity that we all have. And if we find a greater unity amongst ourselves and with the environment we live in, we're starting to really come up with the solutions, whether it's through technology or through a change in our own behaviour or attitudes, to some of the more pressing problems that we do have more immediately. So it's really exciting stuff. So what about my situation that I was going to tell you about? Well, my sun is 0 degrees Aquarius, and Elisa's draconian sun is just slightly outside of Aquarius. It's just right at the end of Capricorn. So her draconic sun, based on her north node being repositioned to 0 degrees Aries, and that gives her soul chart, is conjunct my sun, which is one of the wonderful things about the way our two charts connect. But for us, Saturn sits right on that point. Now for me it's in the 3rd house, for Elisa it's in the 6th, which is to do with life organisation, health, fitness, diet. The 3rd house is about media, it's about our nervous system, it's about our communications with neighbours. It's also to do with writing. It's why I've been a writer for the most part since I started this business in 1995. But I feel Saturn moving on to my sun can have quite profound implications. It can be limiting. It can make me have less energy. And of course I've had my fair share of health problems over the years. I don't really need any more, thank you very much. But I'm hoping that Saturn in the 3rd house, which is to do with media and to do with messages, will enable me to get my message out in a more effective way. But it's going to be interesting how you see how I look in the videos and these live dives, how you feel that I'm developing with Saturn's influence, whether I become more stern or whether I come out of my shyness a little bit, which has always been quite a problem for me. So please keep an eye on me, but thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure. I'm really enjoying these new format deep dives, and I hope you found it informative. But to recap, I feel that we need to look at Saturn moving into Aquarius, but not in isolation to other planets. So I've looked at 2 different birth charts for the 2 points of entry. March is challenging, I do believe, but December is really very, very positive. Thank you so much for joining me. As I said before, I'd love it if you subscribed, liked or commented. But for now, good luck and goodbye.